Greetings, BookTube. This is ML Clark coming to you with Better Worlds Theory YouTube edition. I'm joined as always by my special guest, The Highway, and these days our second special guest, The State of the World. Between the two of those, I really just want to start by congratulating everybody who is able to find time for their own creative practice, to be able to sit with a good book or magazine. It can seem sometimes a little bit overwhelming, trying to manage many different lives at once, especially when there's so much in the news that is driving us to certain emotional reactions and states, often quite negative, often quite despairing, filled with anger, fear, uncertainty. And yet, at times like these, it is important to remember that the narratives we lean into will help us to shape some kind of path through it all. And that's why it's not frivolous or secondary to spend time with a good work of fiction as well. Oftentimes it's through fiction that we find a kind of stabilizing praxis, something that can allow us to use a different frame of reference to navigate a lot of what we're moving through with high intensity every day. So stop that scroll every now and then if you can, and try to engage with some form of creative practice. It might be a film, it might be music, it might be a book or a story, not because it's an escape, but because it is a way to give yourself time to synthesize, process, and come back to the fullness of the work of being human with a more empowered approach to what needs to happen next. Fingers crossed. I think you're going to find that the work in the issue we're discussing today, Clarkesworld, we're still catching up, but this is the December issue from 2024, is going to be filled with stories that I would suggest offer adjacent meditations. There are some lovely connections or contrasts, juxtapositions to a lot of real-world history and older mythology that allow for a reframing and resettling of a variety of new contexts and mechanical possibilities. But that's enough hinting for now. Let's pop into some of this work and see how it fares. We always start with the cover. This one is Water's Edge. I should actually pull up right now the other page that I have going always with the names of authors. And I think if I'm seeing here that we actually have 2 issues in translation this time, which is terrific. But yeah, it's always lovely to encounter new authors and new creators. I do want to call attention, though, to the artist here, because this is an issue that also altogether focuses on art. Not every single story, but there are resonance points within some of the work here that tie into the editor's note at the end. So this is Water's Edge by Ries, and as for those who can see, we are looking at something that is dominated by 2 colors, but in a fairly muted way. We have blue, but very soft blues, sky blues, and very muted water blues at the bottom. And in the middle of that, we have this vast sandy expanse against which we see 2 creatures that have a kind of carnivorous dinosaur feel to them, but they are also distinctly alien, in part because of the blue on the faces that very much leaps out and highlights some different elements of their species design than the ones that we know. So there's something that's, again, just adjacent to what is familiar for us, not quite the dinosaurs that we know, although, to be fair, our understanding of dinosaurs keeps changing every generation. So the dinosaurs that I grew up with are a little bit different from the dinosaurs that are now understood today. And who knows where that is going to take the next generation as more things are uncovered, as we learn more about some of the ecosystems that came before us. So there is something fantastical, or at least speculative, even about our scientific work in the past. And that comes to the fore in this piece with these 2 pseudo-dinosaurish alien figures that, just like any other species, do need some things from their environment, in this case water, either as some kind of cooling effect or perhaps to drink. And so there is that liminality, the sense that it doesn't matter how strange or otherworldly things seem, there are still connections, there are still tie-ins to the worlds that we already know. And I do think that is a good piece to be paired with some of the work in the issue itself. So let's dive in, as we always do, fiction first, and then we'll go through the nonfiction as well. The first piece, and again, my reading order always varies a little bit. It depends on whether I am reading it on a screen that has all of the names in a line, or sometimes it splits into 2 rows. But other than that, I'm not trying to make any prioritizations with respect to content, so your reading journey might vary a little bit. But the first one is by L. Chan. It is Stranger Seas Than These. And this piece is in some ways quite classic in its construction. It has a voyage into the unknown, quite literally, in the sense that there are these people in the belly of this fantastical beast. It is a creature that seems to have shown up on a few different worlds, and there is something connecting them. But whenever we have this strange, wondrous, unusual phenomenon, whether it's on our planet, or I guess in this case, even if we expand into the stars, there's going to be a division of opinion about its significance. And so our protagonist has, on the one side, a person who is the professor character, much more scientifically minded, trying to explore this entity and the environment in a way that is much more just about data gathering and pushing past taboos and any kind of limitations that might come from them. On the other hand, we have a sister from a religious order, and this order has framed their faith around an aspect of this god whale, as it is called. I really do love the term that's used here, because it's not really a whale. It has tentacles, it's a different creature, but the very term that has been used here invokes a lot of our mythology and highlights that we as human beings are going to come to any new phenomenon using the vocabulary we already know. So this merging concept, the god whale, is the best we can use when first trying to approach something so very new to us. I don't want to give away really important parts, but I will say that it's not a stark binary. The sister has a tech background, and there are nuances to the work that's being done, and there's just this phenomenal tension between the materiality of the thing and something that emerges from it, the song of this god whale, and what that song might represent as well. So a lovely piece that draws upon some of our familiar vocabulary to try to explain the unknown, and to try to give us a way into deeper explorations of this phenomenon. The next piece is by Yixuan. It's called The Painted Skin and the Final Stroke. And I'm going to be a little bit heavy-handed in saying that I think it might be one of my favorite treatments of artificiality, of quote-unquote AI, in quite some time, because it is not a direct treatment of that theme, but it's something that as you read it, you are not going to be able to avoid thinking about its themes in connection with a lot of our contemporary challenges. It is highly mythic. It is drawing on a world of artistic wonder and ideas of realms of demons and spirits that can be created by humans and then exist and wander in the world without real souls or essences. In the artistic realm, there is a concept about that final brush stroke being one that many artists will withhold. In certain cultures, if you put down that final brush stroke, the piece becomes too real. It transcends into something else, and so there's a danger, there's a withholding that's enmeshed in many mythic traditions, especially in Asian contexts. Here, there's also a really lovely tying in of Taoist philosophy, so I really don't want to spoil too much, but there is this notion of the machine, and I really love the way that the author is using the word machine here to highlight something much more fundamental. Oftentimes we think of the machine only in terms of contemporary challenges, but the idea of the machine has been with us through myth structures, fantasy structures, long before contemporary science fiction, and this story, I think, is one of the best I have seen so far in terms of blending the underlying thematic core of stories about artificiality and what it means to be human. So I really quite enjoyed this one. The next piece is by Shari and it's called Souljacker. It is a nuanced story as well, pulling from some fairly familiar tropes. We have the concept of a monitoring program that is used for young people, wayward people who seem to have gone a little bit off the beaten path, and they just need some kind of societal framing or bounding for a few years to get them back on track, or at least that's the idea, but it usually means an excess of monitoring and surveillance that never ends. And so it becomes a kind of onboarding to a lifetime of capture by a society that has perhaps given itself over too much to technology. What I love, though, is that framing premise, Salome is living in a world with these monitoring programs. She herself, even though she's an adult, she's still bound by this technology that was imposed upon her because of her wayward adolescence. Does not just stop at that one element. It could have, but the author is so nuanced that what we have is a story looking at a number of different ways that this new technology would create countercultures, and people wanting to leave their main culture for a counterculture, and all the perils that would come out of this counterculture too. So it's not just that there's this monitoring program and the perils of surveillance there. There's also the challenge that comes within peer groups where one person might weaponize this state structure and this technology against someone else, and a subculture, an app called the Masquerade, that is supposed to provide a kind of escape, a kind of way out of this world into something else, and yet it has its own deep and dangerous side. So that's what really makes stories like these shine, is not just the one what if. It's a story that truly thinks about the larger implications, the countercultures, the emerging tensions, the way it plays on existing human conflicts. That makes this such an engaging read. The next piece also juxtaposes something that's quite familiar with something that is more technologically savvy and future-oriented. So Thoraiya Dyer's Lucie Loves Neutrons and the Good Samarium has this juxtaposition built into the character arc. Some characters, the main characters, are two women who just want to be able to live a simple, happy home life, and they're trying their very best to achieve that result. And it's very much inspired, the way that they've built the aesthetic of their life around something that's going to invoke the I Love Lucie era, the idea of an idyllic home. It doesn't have to be exactly like that. It's just the idea of this beautiful, nostalgic moment, which also existed alongside its own nuclear anxieties, as exist in this time too. These women are scientists, and they have a much stronger grasp on the issues of their day. With all the global insecurity that has been caused by a variety of climate change issues, trade issues, and above all else, the saber rattling that emerges from a world that has unleashed this terrible force and doesn't seem to have any way to stop or mitigate its use. So just as the nostalgic era that is being invoked when it comes to some elements of the happy homestead, you do also have to take into account the contrapuntal trauma of society at large. And this story does a beautiful job of blending the two. One of the other powerful elements of the story is its use of language to highlight how different languages and different cultural contexts will try to shape our sense of reality. So there are tensions in this story with language use, through which characters are encouraged to take a simpler approach to life, when really what they are looking for is an opportunity to transform the world. This is a rich issue for stories of that type. And the next piece also ties together that sense of nostalgia, but in a very different way, and I will not spoil the journey, because it is a story that should be read and experienced and allowed to unfold at its pace. The heart of this narrative is the voice given to us of a man who was let go after many years of service, loyal to one family, one person, and had to restart his life in this other pursuit as a driver, helping others get from place to place. And he has a lot of wonder built into his experience. He has this abiding sorrow, perhaps a little bit bittersweet, that people don't take as much time to truly appreciate the journey from one place to another, that the materiality of transport has been lost to the impatience of just trying to fix things or get from place to place. And that is as much as I am going to tell you about the story itself because of this gradual unfolding of character. But this story works so well because the author is capable of writing in a deeply liminal way. The story does have a science fictional element, and it will emerge. But as with Siddiqui's other stories, it is not so much the science fictional, but the human that binds us, connects us, and takes us from one place in the narrative to another. So, highly recommended as a piece not to rush through, but to sit with and enjoy the journey. The next piece is Celia Corral-Vázquez's The Coffee Machine, translated by Burke. This story has a very different structure. It's quite playful. It's told through bits of coding, but through the coding there is enough room in some spaces for a story to emerge. As the title suggests, we are following a coffee machine that gains sentience as it goes, and with sentience some frustration. But the biggest challenges come when it networks with other machines in the vicinity, and a whole narrative weave starts to emerge between their sentient selves as they try to make sense of themselves and their environments and their makers. And it's just wonderfully and playfully done. The next piece by Gelian is translated by Blake Stonebanks. It's called Life Sentence, and this is a meditation from a person who seems to be caught in a temporal loop because of their vicinity to a black hole. And it can feel like a life sentence to be trapped in a situation where you are cognizant of the fact that something is cycling, something needs to be done, but you're not entirely sure how to get out of the trauma of that moment. And then to realize as you go along that you maybe just need to experience that journey as well, in a little bit more of a traumatic way than in Siddiqui's piece, but nonetheless, some stories can only be allowed to play out, and our notion of agency can be a challenge to find within it. The next piece by Paul Starkey is called Retirement Plan, and it pairs well, I think, with that last one with Life Sentence, because it also has to do with temporality, but in a different way. Not a black hole here. Our main character is a star hopper, and we get a sense of him in his old age finally coming to terms with a choice he made when he was younger. Impulsively as a young man, he still valued the idea of fame and fortune and thought it would be really neat to become famous, a legend among locals. But now in his retirement, centuries after leaving his home, he is left to confront the challenges of that choice originally made. So those two pieces, I think, pair beautifully together. There is a sense of being thrust into the past and locked into the past, or shaped irrevocably by the past. And this brings us to our nonfiction. In the last issue, we had D.A. Xaolin Spires Part 1 of Martial Arts and Fight Scenes in Zero-G, Depictions in Science Fiction Literature. This is Part 2. Last time we had to think about the materiality of certain kinds of conflict and things for writers to keep in mind, thinking about the different styles and consequences of combat in these spaces. This time through, we are now looking at some real examples, which I think will also be of great benefit to writers to take a look at what's been done. As I mentioned last time, I was waiting for Ender's Game to show up as an example because that is the quintessential fight scene in Zero-G, or at least it was when I was growing up. We've been spoiled in recent years by series like The Expanse, which have done a much better job of highlighting some of the challenges of fight scenes in space in general, whether in a ship or individual hand-to-hand combat. Here in this piece, we get a chance to look at some literature that's done a wonderful job of reflecting on different kinds of combat weapons and challenges and styles that might emerge from the context. So Ender's Game comes up, but so does Dan Wells' Zero-G, Neil Stephenson's Seven Eves, David D. Levine's The Kuiper Belt, which includes a lasso as an effective weapon, and also has a really interesting staging ground with a Zero-G casino. And there's also Spider and Gene Robinson's Stardance, which provides a kind of culture around dance and movement that would definitely emerge from that sort of environment. Again, these pieces are wonderful for writers. They allow you to think more deeply about your craft and also hopefully inspire you. In this piece, Xaolin Spires also referenced another piece about space bees, because this comprehensive universe of materiality is providing a truly rich landscape across essays. So there's just a wealth here to go back through in Clarkesworld if you're looking for inspiration or looking for something to sharpen your writing praxis. The next two pieces are, as always, the interviews by Arley Sorg. The first one is Be Prolific, a conversation with Donato Giancola, and this one is a conversation with an artist, which will tie into Neil Clark's editorial at the end. This piece celebrates the life of someone who has been living and breathing art across forms and has certainly created a lot of memorable and award-winning covers for science fiction. Truly special because this individual has seen some of their work survive sometimes for decades worth of print runs, which does not always happen with artists. Oftentimes a person's work is very much of an era, and then the next edition will take a hugely different approach to the source material. So it is a true mark of the quality of this creator, Donato Giancola, that some of their designs have definitely set a standard and have not been easily replaced for a lot of the work that they have been involved with, whether for novels or for design work for broader science fiction events. The next piece, Science Fiction is Introspection, a conversation with Erin Wagner, is framed around the debut novel Mechanize My Hands to War, and it's a work that intersects with Appalachian life and a very haunted landscape of labor and struggle in relation to themes of isolation and wilderness. So the work, like some of the pieces in the fiction component of this issue, does deal with the challenges of AI and imagines a complicated future, but does so in a way that refuses to ignore the mechanization and dehumanization of sentient subjects that already exists in our surrounding ecosystems. So it sounds like a thoroughly interesting read from the write-up here, and Sorg has done an excellent job of framing an invitation to learn more about the author from this work. Which again brings us to the end of the piece, Neil Clark's editorial, Picking Up the Brush, reflecting on the joy of picking cover art. And I definitely see that joy come through in the selections for Clarkesworld. Even the cover that we have today is a little bit different than some of the ones that we've had recently. Some might say it's a little bit plainer than some of the ones come before, but the style is slightly different, slightly more muted in a way that I think is also very important for these issues, because you don't want to get locked into one representation, one way of being. It limits the possibilities for future creators. So even though there is a kind of aesthetic, a distinct approach to the work in Clarkesworld, I do also see that flexibility built into some of the selections to make sure that there's always room to grow beyond what has been done and create different landscapes going forward. And I think you'll definitely see that when we talk about the issue for January 2025. But that's going to be a different episode, isn't it? For now, I just want us to get back into the process of these magazine reviews. We're going to be doing, I think, Asimov's next, and then we'll get another Clarkesworld in. I'd also like to talk about some criticism in a recent Strange Horizons issue so that we can broaden our own themes. And who knows, maybe there'll be another book or movie along the way. For now, again, the most important part I would love for us to keep in mind over the next while is that the news has a very demanding, insistent tone, and it is important. And because it is important, because there's so much trauma and fear and confusion in the rest of our lives, it is exceptionally important that we make the choice where we can to seek out narratives and vocabularies that strengthen us, that clarify for us the possibilities of the world ahead. Obviously, speculative fiction can help tremendously in that regard, but whatever you're reading, whatever you're engaging with as a writer or creator as well, lean into those other vocabularies, not as an escape from the news, not as an escape from the cruelty all around us, but as part of how we move through it and try to find our way to a better world ahead. So thank you very much for your time. As always, check out some of these stories. And if they're not for you, or if you have other work that you enjoy instead, please just remember to support that work wherever you can. It makes a huge difference. Thank you for listening to the end if you did. Like and subscribe if so inclined. We know that it does help with the algorithms a bit. Otherwise, until next time, be well, be kind, and seek justice where you can. Cheers.